and we'll get a recording of your stuff. All right, so just go ahead. I think I'll just stay here.
All right.
I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks. So I won't actually have access to my notes like this, but that's fine. I know most of this pretty well. All right, so hi everyone, thanks for having me today. My name's Jason Chang. I run a managed cybersecurity firm here in San Francisco. We've been around since 2008, and it's only been recently where people have started to listen to me. So it's kind of interesting. So I got started in cybersecurity actually when I was a kid. I found out how to essentially run circles around my computer science teacher, who was actually the volleyball teacher in high school. And the challenge there was, you know, we had to turn in homework, and I found out all kinds of ways to disseminate the homework to everybody beforehand so that we could all play games, because that was my real impetus there as a child. And what I started to really get more and more interested in how all of that worked. And later on, basically when you hand out the homework to, say, 40 kids, what ends up happening is people turn in the exact same thing, even though you tell them not to, right? They have to change everything. But later on, my challenge turned into restoring the games back onto the servers after the teacher deleted them. So don't do these sorts of things. But as a kid, that was sort of a fun thing for me to do. So this tech talk is one that I've given a couple times now to a couple different schools and organizations. It's about the dark web and the upcoming CCPA law. I'm not sure if you have heard of that. Who here has heard of the dark web? Okay.
I have actually used it before, but I used it on passport first few times.
Okay. And who here has heard of the CCPA, the upcoming CCPA law? Okay. So that at least you'll get something out of the CCPA stuff if you haven't heard of the dark web. Okay, so essentially virtually any company is susceptible to data breaches, right? It's all about being in the crosshairs. And what I've sort of figured out is a lot of companies are just really not doing a very good job on protecting our data. It's actually outstanding how bad they are at it. In fact, I attended a public hearing on Wednesday of this week, of last week, I should say, for the CCPA, which is the California Consumer Privacy Act. It's a privacy act that's coming into play. And one of the more interesting takeaways was a privacy rights advocate saying the exact same thing that I've experienced personally, and that's the CEOs of all these companies just don't care about our data. They're willing to kick the can down the road. That's A, the most likely issue, or B, they're looking at essentially saying that's not my problem. I'm going to retire in the next couple of years. I'm going to make it the next guy's problem or the next gal's problem, right? And so that sort of attitude is really coming back to haunt us in a lot of different ways. And it's because it's so endemic in what's been going on, you're going to see some pretty interesting stuff that I can pull. As far as data breaches, it's really kind of bad. So there's a few ways that you can protect yourself. So I have just a few hints here. I mean, you guys are a cybersecurity class. You should probably have a lot of these sorts of things in mind already. But my takeaway from these companies losing our data is paranoia is your friend. So you can always opt out of data collection. Right now, that's not very effective, right? Come January 1st, when the California Consumer Privacy Act comes into play, that will be a lot more effective. You will actually have the ability to know who is selling your data, which is amazing. I don't know who sold my data.
AT&T.
There's a lot. And there's a lot more than AT&T. Facebook is a famous example, right, where Facebook sold all of our data to Cambridge Analytica. But those are the more famous, well-known examples. There's a lot of ones that nobody has heard about. And I'll pull some live data from the dark web in a little bit, and you'll see there was actually a recent data breach of like over 1 billion accounts, terabytes of data that was lost. I'd never even heard of this company until they started seeing data from it. Using strong passwords, keep in mind I'm normally talking to you know, business people or economics people, right? So I'm sure you guys have strong passwords, but you know, use them. So secure your computer and your mobile devices. Keep the patches up, right? And your browser patches up. Keep your operating system patches up. Keep your phone patches up. Don't open email or attachments from unknown sources. This is, again, just sort of more common sense type of stuff. And what's interesting about this is it used to be that, you know, hey, don't open an executable. But now viruses can be embedded within a JPEG. And there was recent evidence that, you know, proof of concept examples where viruses were embedded into an MP4, right? So as those get executed, you can actually transfer viruses that way. Phishing emails, that's obvious, right? It's a little bit harder though for some folks that aren't experienced with this sort of thing. Again, this class, you guys are probably, who's familiar with spear phishing? The term spear phishing. So spear phishing is when you actually use subject's social media information against them. I was giving a recent lecture at a college where I was describing how you know, you can look up someone's boss, and actually this had happened to one of our potential, you know, customers, someone that I had talked to recently. And in that situation, they were saying that what happened in that situation was someone had gotten an email from their boss, purportedly their boss, saying, go down to the store and buy a whole bunch of gift cards, and we want you to buy those gift cards because we're going to have a giveaway. It's, you know, the holiday season. Believe it or not, the only thing that stopped that attack was that this young lady's credit card was maxed out. If it hadn't been maxed out, she would have bought the gift cards and sent them along. And there were, you know, a lot of times they'll ask for virtual gift cards so that they can be transferred immediately. You don't actually have to have a physical resource for that. So that gets to kind of that last point there of limit the amount of data, or at least know what data is out there for you, right? So what can you do to be safer? A lot of the folks I talk to don't have a password manager in place. Who here does use a password manager? Every hand should go up, hopefully. So a password manager is a great way to actually manage your passwords. I actually go a step further in my paranoia. I use a specific domain, and it's a feeder domain to everything, and I'll actually provide a unique email address for everything I sign up for. So that way I know who's losing my data. So if I was to sign up for the free Wi-Fi here, I noticed that it didn't ask me for a login, but my login would have been ccsf at my domain, right? It's interesting when you do that, what kind of feedback you get, and you see stuff flying out onto the internet, and you're like, oh, so they lost my data today, great. So a password manager is a great way to just use one password to unlock a whole set of separate passwords, right? So for myself, I have pretty limited brain capacity. I can remember maybe 3 passwords at any given time, right? And I mean, I'm exaggerating, I can remember more than that, but I don't want to. So I'll use a password manager to unlock all my other passwords. These are some of the more common ones. The one that doesn't have any information here in the middle at the bottom, that's KeePass. Password Safe is a great one developed originally by Bruce Schneier. He sold it off. And the other ones on here are you know, pretty generic ones. I actually, you know, condone using even the iCloud keychain. Yes?
Sometimes I use 1Password, but they give me my recovery keys in plain text. Is that kind of safe to kind of keep that and store?
So they do that for convenience, right? I mean, you wouldn't, those recovery keys are hopefully only useful for a short period of time or only for one-time use. So they're OTPs, one-time passwords, right? And then so once you use them, a lot of services do that. And it's because they don't have a good way to transfer that information back to you. SMSs are a good example of another completely broken solution, right? People think SMS is secure. SMS is not secure. It's actually quite easy to clone someone's phone. It's really not hard. No one's going to clone our phones, or hopefully not, because we're not huge targets. But if you are a huge target, if you're a celebrity, if you're a political figure, you absolutely have to be aware of that. I know of people, you were talking earlier about China. I know of people that have gone to China and they were reporters and they have had their phones cloned. There's actually a whole bunch of different attacks that nation states will do against you, depending on which nation state you're in and how much of an adversary you are to that nation state. So if you're in China reporting about Tibet, they don't like you. These are, again, just some examples. There's a lot more out there. These are some that I had people kind of thinking about. Yeah.
Does that same thing go for iMessage versus SMS?
So Apple iMessages are theoretically secure. They're more secure. SMSs are totally broken. If you really want to use something safer, use Signal or use something like that. So, hey, Edward Snowden condoned Signal, so you know it's not bad. It's actually, Signal is actually a derivative from a company called Whisper that was developed by this guy named Moxie Marlinspike. He's pretty badass. So it's actually a good solution. There's actually other ones. Theoretically, WeChat is secure. Theoretically, some of those other ones are secure. I don't know how secure those other ones are. WhatsApp is theoretically secure, but it goes through Facebook servers, so who knows?
Who knows how secure that is now?
Right, right. I actually put a lot more faith in something that is open source to some degree, right? Because then people can look into it. Although there's a double-edged sword on that, is that since people can look into the code on those sorts of solutions, they can theoretically look for different vectors of attack for those solutions.
Thank you.
So we had a couple more people come in, and so I'd asked earlier about the dark web, and I know a lot of you already know about the dark web, but I'm going to go into that anyways, just as a description of what's going on there. So most people, when they think of the internet, they really are only using the stuff that you see at the top of the surface web, right? And what they don't realize is that the majority of the bulk of the data on the internet is actually in either the deep web or the dark web. And a good example that I always give is my iCloud photos, right? I don't have very many photos published out on the internet. I have a few, but not that many. The majority of my data is stored behind a lock and key, behind a password, right? So it's not publicly accessible data. And so that would be what you would consider the deep web. I also have medical records. I hope those aren't available today, but they may be. And so that's another example of part of the deep web, right? So what's interesting is that if the bulk of the data is out there, so 96% of the data out there is not publicly available data. That's one of the reasons why we see these absolutely fantastic breaches, because there's so many interesting things for people to hack into. Who here has heard of Mossack Fonseca? How about the Panama Papers?
Yes.
Okay, so Mossack Fonseca was the company, the law firm based out of Panama that lost everyone's data for the papers there. And what's interesting is that's actually deposed leaders of state across the world. It's caused an assassination. One of the reporters that was in Malta, if you've read the news recently about Malta, she was blown up by a bomb because she was investigating the Panama Papers. And there's all kinds of interesting information there that we've really only started to see a little bit. There's only been a little bit of attention to that. But there's so much interesting data that people are realizing that it's actually the deep web that's got the interesting stuff. That's where your corporate secrets are. That's where all this stuff that's hidden. I've actually kept telling lawyers, you hold the world's secrets in your hands. You absolutely need a firewall. I can't tell you how many lawyers I've met that are still using consumer grade devices. They have like a D-Link router or a Linksys router, and it's like, okay, come on, folks. Let's amp up the game here a little bit. My comparison for a lot of this for those sorts of companies is it's actually super easy for you to raise the bar to say 80%. You know, it's really not that expensive or hard. To get from 80 to say 95% is super expensive. Not that expensive, but I mean, you're getting up there. to get from 95 to 99% is exorbitantly expensive. I only have 1 or 2 customers that are like that. And so there's some actually super interesting hacks that if we have time for, I'll talk about later for that top 4%. But most of the world, just come on, raise the bar to 85%. Make sure you don't have publicly exposed data. A lot of times people will start using AWS and they really don't know what they're doing with it. And so hopefully there's going to be more tools and stuff. The interesting thing about AWS is even stuff like that is not necessarily secure, and the tools that they're selling are not the best tools at all. My favorite quote for a long time was, "There is no cloud, it's just someone else's computer." In fact, I actually did an analysis of one of their tools when it first came out called Macy, where it actually would search for data that you had that was sensitive data. And there's some interesting examples where that tool absolutely is a failure in so many ways. And they released it, right? Yeah.
So, we hear most about, social security numbers, credit card numbers,
Yes.
stolen or child porn. Have there been many cases of information like an entire medical company, health management companies, medical records for their clients stolen and then bought and put to some use?
Oh yeah, and I'll show you some examples.
And
Yeah.
then, the same thing for like intellectual property, and that, I would imagine that's.
How about MyFitnessPal as an example for that? So MyFitnessPal is a part of a health program that is available. I believe it's with Fitbit, or it was with Fitbit at one point, or with Samsung phones. I haven't actually looked too much into it. I've just seen a lot of their data out on the internet. And that data is where you've gone, your all kinds, whatever you plugged into that health data, right? So that's an interesting personal one that tracks you. But there's also breaches of hospitals. Hospitals were actually big targets for a long time. They've amped their game up significantly. So the big targets these days are actually municipalities. So municipalities are completely under barrage. It's actually ridiculous to the level that they're under attack. And they have super limited resources. I can't get to my notes on here, but maybe I'll be able to flip over to that later. And I have some data points from that.
Yeah, they always talk about companies being able to use this data, but I don't know if we've ever seen any large scale use of stolen data for something like marketing or for making actuarial tables.
Oh, that's so complicated. Why don't I just steal your data and buy a bunch of stuff with your data, or open lines of credit in your name? That would make me more money really fast. Like if I had your PII data, if I had your social. A great example of that is the Office of Personal Management. I was talking to a gentleman who kept saying, people keep opening lines of credit in my name and opening credit cards and bank accounts in my name. Why is this happening? I asked him one question. Did you ever work for the government? He's like, yes, I was a contractor. I retired 5 years ago. Well, guess what? The Office of Personal Management got breached and they stole all that data, all of it. And it was suspected it was China, but then it's actually being resold. So that's a little bit strange. I'm not sure how that is all played, because I'm not on that side. Yeah?
Would you know like how long it takes after the data has been stolen before it reaches the dark web, or how do you know that it is on the dark web?
I can show you.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can show you how it's actually bought and sold. And a lot of times, what's interesting is the people that steal the data, they actually don't know the value of the data. They don't know how many of those records are actually still accurate. But they do have certain amounts of data and they will try to use it. So.
You're answering the question that a lot of us have been scared to go look at.
Oh, ask away. It's, I definitely have been dealing a lot with that lately. I get a lot of our customers based on, what I hate is that when a customer comes to me because their house is already on fire, I would much rather prefer to just help you get that bar up to 85% rather than go back and have to do a security analysis and be like, oh, well, you have no firewall, or you have no endpoint protection, and you are using 1, 2, 3, 4 ABC as your password, or like most of your people are. And here's the reason how I know that is that data at some point got stolen. Someone exfiltrated your entire Active Directory database, and they're buying and selling your employees' data. Okay, so yeah, so this was something that we were just talking about recently, right? And let me actually jump here to viewing the notes on this, because this has some pretty interesting notes. So Atlanta, does anyone know that Atlanta, this entire city of Atlanta was hacked? And they were basically, the people that hacked them asked for $51,000. So what has happened in the past is that the FBI at one point recommended that you pay the ransom. And what ended up happening from that is it just poured gas on the fire. And so the municipalities just started getting attacked right and left and right and left. And you'll see some examples down here. Atlanta could have solved their problem for $51,000. Instead, it cost them $17 million to solve, right? And it affected 6 million people. And so, hey, you know, that's why at a certain point, the FBI is like, okay, look, if you really want to pay that ransom because it solves your problems today, you can. And what that led to is the next three. So Baltimore then was attacked. The hackers asked for $80,000. And they always ask for it in Bitcoin, right? They ended up losing $18.2 million in productivity was estimated. And they spent $10 million on remediation. Now the next two are my favorites. So that was, Baltimore happened in early of this year, around I think February, March, something like that. And then what happened later was Florida started getting its cities attacked. So Riviera Beach in Florida, it's only got 35,000 people. They actually paid $600,000 in ransom. And so I see this as like there's an escalation here in terms of, even though the first two guys didn't pay, there was other cities that did pay, right? And so that started to generate a lot more interest in this kind of stuff. So $600,000 they paid in ransom. You can Google it. It's a pretty interesting story. Yes?
Why are they asking so little? This is not Asian.
Oh, well, $600,000 is a lot of money for 35,000 people.
You already mentioned that they asked for $30,000.
Yeah, so Atlanta, they asked for 51,000, and then Baltimore, they asked for 80,000.
Why so little?
They didn't know that this was going to be profitable, right? So this is, municipalities have been starting to be attacked more or less in 2017, 2018. And then people are like, oh my gosh, that guy made so much money this way. I'm going to get in this game too. And so Riviera Beach actually paid $1 million for new computers, $941,000 for new computers, and that didn't solve anything for them. And so they ended up paying $600,000 as a ransom, right? So that's just madness. Lake City, Florida, they have 67,500 people, and they paid $460,000 in ransom. I know someone who is at an unnamed municipality, shall not be named, and his response to all of this was, yeah, you know, I don't have any staff or any people here, and if we get attacked, I'm just going to quit. So that's how things are.
You know, I'm an employment specialist working with students at CNIT for cybersecurity jobs. It astounds me how many times I call city agencies like head of IT, and they're the only one. They're the only person.
That's exactly the issue. All right, so let me jump this back to a full screen. Sorry, I have to maybe scoot it forward back to there. Sorry, whoever is watching this in video. So let's see here. The city of Union City, has anyone heard that they got attacked about a month ago and it shut down all their computers? It shut down all the computers in the city hall. It even shut down all the cop cars' computers. Yeah, yeah. So they couldn't do anything for about 2 weeks. It's pretty silly. And that's actually an example. You guys are in a cybersecurity class. Don't build a flat network. I can't tell you how many times I go to companies. I'm like, okay, look, pop open your command screen, do an ARP-A. Let's see what you can see. I should only see the gateway, and I should see printers. Maybe file shares if you're still doing that old school type thing, right? That's it. That's all I should see. If I see your neighbor's computer and the guy over there's computer and the gal over there's computer, we're in trouble, because that means that only one system has to get infected, and it can just completely go across your flat network. And the controls to do this, solve this, have been in place for 15 years, 20 years. So data breaches exposed 4.1 billion records. So this is an old statistic. This is from August 2019. This is probably double that now. And okay, I'm a victim of this too, because I have to deal with all these mega companies. I signed a lease and to rent a house, and as you know, with a lease, you have to provide a whole bunch of sensitive data, right? They're essentially doing a credit check on you. They want to know a lot of sensitive information. They wanted to know the names of my kids. And after I put together the lease, I asked, how do I get it back to you? I was expecting them to at least have a Dropbox or something like that, right? At the very least. At the very least, just have a consumer-grade Dropbox instance, you know? Because at least I know that way it's transferred over HTTPS. They asked me to email it to them. So as soon as they asked me to email it to them, I'm like, okay, well, this is my game. I know all about this. Let's see about you guys. So I actually did a search on the company and found that they have a couple thousand records out on the dark web. This is a tool that my company has invested in, that we have. And I was able to pull passwords and email addresses for all of these employees for the company. I contacted their CIO. Oh, and I guess I should preface this by saying, when I was talking to the realtor, I was like, you guys are going to take my data very seriously, correct? And her response was, of course we are. We have a CIO. Okay. So I looked him up. First of all, he was surprised that I found his phone number. And I called him. And I said, hey, I've got your data here. I'm going to send you a whole bunch of data over, 2,300 accounts. And I want you to take what I send to you very seriously. By the way, you have a bug in your website here where I can't submit the data because you filled out the field incorrectly and whatever. So that's why I had to call him, because I didn't have any other way to submit the data, which is ridiculous. And so I sent him his data, and I never got a thank you back. But hopefully they're fixing something on their end. Who knows, right? But my point to this being that I'm going to show some examples of data searches in a second, and so don't be surprised if your information's there or anything like that. It's no matter how careful we are, right? Other companies are constantly losing our information, and it's just sort of ridiculous. So some examples of how you can protect yourself in your business. Security awareness, you guys have that down. So multi-factor authentication, enable that wherever you can, no matter where you can. If you have the option to use an app like Google Authenticator or something along those lines versus SMS, go with the app. Apps are a lot more secure. As I said earlier, SMS is clonable. Endpoint security is pretty common sense. We're all used to having antivirus solutions. What gets interesting though is antivirus is outdated. If you've ever heard of antivirus, is sort of an older solution. So my example for endpoint solution with antivirus is a lot like the armor on a knight, right? Inevitably the knight will get scratched. And so the newer endpoint solutions are called advanced persistent threat solutions. And what they look at is those are more like your white blood cells. So everyone gets scratched, but it's the white blood cells that will react because they see an executable start up. and running all these commands that it shouldn't be doing. Or I don't know if you guys have learned a lot about that kind of stuff, but they're very handy. Secure Wi-Fi networks. A lot of people don't know about Wi-Fi and how it works. And I'm not talking about just having a password. Wi-Fi is super interesting. Do you guys know that you can be tracked by stores? So what's an interesting point on stores is that, we're used to triangulation requiring 3 devices. You actually don't need that. If you know the floor plan of a building, I only need 1 access point to track you. All of our phones have unique MAC addresses. I can know every single time you come back to my store. I can tell you when you step into my store based on radio frequency. And if you ever signed up for anything like I signed up for here for the free Wi-Fi, guest Wi-Fi, I can continuously be tracked wherever I go. So firewall, hey, that's important. At least don't move past that consumer grade device. Dark web monitoring, that's what I'm going to show in a moment. IAM is identity access management. IAM is the basis of what your security builds should be based on. If you can establish someone's identity over strong controls, then you can build up from there. You can establish all that's really what you want. That's really what you want. Anti-malware, I guess I talked about that earlier, and then guidance. So high-level security guidance. If you have a company, I mean, at least engage with a fractional expert. This is one of my favorite examples. Was I had a customer that said every time, when I go to work, it's hit or miss. Sometimes I don't see the printers and I can't print, and sometimes I can print. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, your business is located right above Starbucks. Have you ever at any point in time associated to their wireless? And their answer was yes. Okay, well, what's happened in that situation is you're still connected to their access point and you're not connected to your business's access point. So a strong wireless solution where you can provide controls is good. I'm going to go past this really quickly because I want to get to the dark web stuff. But again, I'm just sort of reemphasizing use a password manager. The CCPA is the Privacy Act that comes into effect January 1st. And most people haven't heard of it. So that's my takeaway here from these numbers here. It's actually got some pretty interesting teeth. It takes into effect January 1st. We have the right to know all the data collected on us. We have the right to refuse sale of our information come January 1st. We have the right to know that, who's our data shared with, and if a breach should occur, we actually have the right to sue those companies. And here's what the damages are. If you lose my data, it's up to $750 per incident. And that's a fix-it ticket. If you don't fix it within 30 days, the fines jump to $2,500. And if you're willfully negligent, like Facebook was in selling the data to Cambridge Analytica, the fines triple. Or if you found to not do anything. So if you run the numbers on that, it's a lot. It's a lot more than what's going on right now. The big companies are going to be the ones targeted the most, and it's most likely not going to be max fines. Otherwise, it would put them out of business completely. But the threat is there. And so the hearing I went to last Wednesday, people were freaking out. Essentially, all these companies sent lawyers in to argue cases why they shouldn't have to obey these things or to push the law for another 2 years out. So yeah. Again, know what data you have on customers. A lot of businesses don't even know what data is collected. Like maybe the marketing team is completely disconnected from the operations team, and the marketing team has all kinds of data that, when they disclose that information, people freak out.
The CCPA also information regarding your information being posted on the internet, right?
No, any data held.
See, I have this information where it's like somebody's posting my people search fast and others they putting all my information up on the internet. Is that regarding the same thing?
I mean, if they do that, they're already negligent. right? Unless that's something that you gave them the access to do.
No, I don't give anybody. It also have information on my brother, my sisters, and everything.
Yeah, you can ask for that to be taken down.
They won't do it.
Well, ask after January 1st. So how does a business comply with the CCPA? You know, you don't have the right to be forgotten with the California CCPA, but other states are enacting the right to be forgotten. Nevada has one coming up that they do have the right to be forgotten. So that's more like Europe's GDPR laws, right? But you do have a lot more rights. So identify the data, increase the cybersecurity of your business. Most of the folks I talk to, when I ask them, what's your cybersecurity budget? 0. Do you know what your budget is for coffee? Yes, I do. Do you know what your budget is for snacks? Yes, I do. And you're telling me you don't know what your cybersecurity budget is? Yeah, we don't have one. That's often what I hear. And then, so also have an action plan. You're going to get breached sooner or later. Just have some sort of plan. That's whatever. That's what we do. That's not really that interesting. So before I jump to the Q&A, let me just show you all something here. Normally, I've got my marketing team with me. And this is one of the people from my marketing team. I pick on her all the time. So I just did a dark web search on her Gmail. And I don't know if you can see it here, but the origin is interesting. I always like pointing this one out when I go to a university or a school. Do you guys know what Chang is? Exactly. It's actually for textbooks. And so a lot of times the folks I talk to, it's like, well, you know, the textbook company lost your data in 2018. Canva is a marketing site that lets you put together graphics. Poshmark and Winello, I think those are shopping sites. 8tracks.com is a music site. Coachella, what's interesting about her Coachella breach is the data from Coachella was traded in 2017. And when I talked to her about it, she's like, oh, I haven't been there since like 2014. So Coachella's actually held on to her data. And what companies need to realize is holding on to someone's data is actually a risk, right? You can take action with that data, but you know, depending on what's in there, you may not want to keep that. And so, and you can also see I've got some of her passwords here. It's a little bit fuzzy on the screen, but she actually at one point in time was using the same password. Just this one lowercase, this one higher, capital. It's been starred out for privacy, but I can pull the full passwords. So I actually also did look here at ccsf.edu.
Good.
And here I've got 4,000 hits. So these are all passwords, you know, and someone we had talked originally about, you know, who has our data, right? I've never even heard of this company, People Data Labs, and oxydata.io. But that was the breach that I read about after Googling who they were. It's like, oh, 1-something billion accounts that they lost. So
Are you able to try someone's email? Like if I wanted to
yeah,
try mine?
yeah.
You want to see my CCSF email?
Okay, what's your CCSF email?
A Patel.
You're a brave man.
No, it's mail.ccs.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But there's a number 8 after the L.
At mail?
Mail right there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
So if you're not, oh, that's not good.
I got a question. So I never used my City College email account, but somehow I was able to see my email for City College being posted. I never used my email here.
Yeah, yeah. So it's usually not a good example to search for with your school email because it's unlikely that you use your school email to sign up for services like Uber or Lyft or Spotify or things like that, right? So I always encourage people for these sorts of searches, what would you use to sign up for a lot of public services, right? And so usually it's your Gmail, and that's usually pretty eye-opening.
So it's a no-no for like Facebook and stuff to use your city card email?
Oh, no, you can. Yeah, I mean, that's not a no-no at all. What I'm saying is for this live data search to actually show more data, you want to actually you want to use something that's you've used to sign up for services. And so my example with Reba there, I'll go back to her. My example of this is she used a Gmail account, and then Poshmark, Wanello, Canva, Chegg, 8Tracks, Coachella. These are all sites that she used, and she used that email to sign up for it. So this is just an example of how all these large companies are losing our data all the time, and people just don't know about it. Our help desk got cracked at Varpath. We use Zendesk. Zendesk sent an email out 4 o'clock on a Friday saying that, oh, by the way, we got breached. We don't think your data was involved, but I'm still like, okay, well, great. Why don't you tell me a little bit more and make sure? But even then, they sent the email out on 4 o'clock on a Friday. Do you think that they're trying to really be willfully, disclose that information? They're trying to hide it. All these companies are trying to hide it all the time. And if they can get away with not telling you, they won't. I've noticed a lot more companies coming up with, the discussion that they have been breached because the CCPA is coming up. And so maybe that's really pushing a lot of these CIOs to start thinking about that a little more.
My next question is about that law that's coming January 1st, in less than a month now.
Yeah.
Well, does that affect old and inactive data that they have? Do they have a
It affects you as a person. It has nothing so much to do with your data. It has more to do with your, if you're a California taxpayer. Yeah. Or they frame the law around California resident. I don't really know what that means, but yeah. Anyway, so that's sort of the presentation. If you guys are interested, I'm happy to go through some of these with you. We can stop sharing so that we can do it in a little more private format.
Is this tool free and publicly available?
No, but there is some public tools available. Have I been pwned?
Yeah, I know that.
Oops, why is that not working? There we go. So if you guys want to search your accounts, Have I Been Pwned is a great one. And if you, and they don't even have full details on everything, but I always like to reference this site and show essentially like, these are pwned websites. And what's funny is most of these are smaller companies that you've never heard of, right? I mean, I'm scrolling down here, I'm still in the numbers. That should say something here. So for example, 8Tracks, that was one of the examples there. I mean, they lost basically 18 million accounts. That's a lot. And so, yeah, we hear about the Googles. I mean, that's like, we hear about the Facebooks, we hear about the really big companies. Maybe you guys knew Uber got breached and they tried to file it under their bug bounty law. And then they got caught for doing that. So they basically paid the ransom and then called it a bug bounty. Yeah, so you may or may not have heard about those big ones, but these smaller ones, we do not hear about them. So Have I Been Pwned is a good way for you to at least, you can check.
If you got hit with ransomware, would you be required to pay out under the CCPA? Because that doesn't mean you lost the data. I mean, that's the whole point. Theoretically, it's not a breach.
Yeah, but so I mean, I guess for ransomware, they're not trying to exfiltrate the data. Right. They're actually just locking, crypto locking everything. Yeah.
So you wouldn't have to report it or anything. And you wouldn't have to pay this $800 a record or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I guess I like the way you think.
No, I've heard that. They said that's why it's a brilliant business model. You can really pay the ransom and get it, and you don't have to do any of this other stuff.
Yeah.
How do you spell home?
Oh, there we go. I think it's pwned.
Yeah.
Anything else? So yeah, have I been pwned?
Say what?
You know, if you don't turn up as a pwned in, have I been pwned? Is it likely that you're not, or they just didn't have enough?
Oh, so that's an interesting question. A lot of times, so let me just refer back to this one. So if you look at this one here, actually, I should have probably brought this up originally. So here we have, you know, we know which sites, like starting at Poshmark down, we know which sites lost the data. The top one is actually the most threatening. And the reason why is that the origin is not disclosed, the type is not disclosed, the source is an ID theft forum. There's actually a password hit there, and it's recent, so last month. So the reason why a lot of times I'll be showing someone this tool, and they'll be like, oh, look, there's no password, or there's, you know, not a big deal. And then, so I'll tell them, okay, look, especially when there's no password, I'll say, look, there's no password because it doesn't make me any money to post the password. I'm not going to make money unless I get you to pay for that data, and then I give you the password.
Yeah.
So what this tells me is that her data was being traded as of 11/12/2019.
Can you search that same one and have them in pwned? I'd just like to see how many hits you get.
Sure.
Because that would be the public stuff. And you would think only a small number would ever become public. Because why would you expose it?
Right.
Keeping it secret would seem to make it
So
12 breach.
yeah, so it's a lot of the similar ones. Yeah. And yeah, pretty much. So the tool that I use allows me to search across a domain. And so what we'll do with that tool is we'll actually, as a company, we'll plug in our customers. Two things, we'll plug in their domain information, and we'll also plug in their IP addresses. So they're static IPs. And so if either of those show up on the dark web, we'll call the customer. But Have I Been Pwned is actually a great tool for personal use. It's just, it's not very applicable for businesses.
So this doesn't count as the dark web then?
This is data that's already out there, and it is scraped from the dark web. So, but it's scraped in the dark web and put on the public web.
So what do companies do once you contact them, the data's on the dark web, then what's the next
Well,
step?
that's an interesting question. About 60 to 70% of the time, they're like, oh, okay, and nothing. If they're our customer already, then they will usually, because they're our customer, they probably already see the value in what we're doing. But a lot of times, like before we turned into a managed security company, we just bought and sold equipment. We would sell people their equipment. And I realized that was a complete fail, right? I remember selling stuff to a government agency and going back to that government agency a year and a half later to do something else. And I saw the firewall that I had sold them. It was plugged in with nothing. It was on. It was powered on. Nothing was plugged into it. It was just sitting there on, right? It was a city agency, San Francisco City. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I just realized that a lot of these companies, they'll buy the equipment because they have the budget for it, but they won't know how to implement it. And if they do implement it, they will implement it incorrectly. And so that's why I really evolved my business to being a managed service business where we're actually focused on smaller companies. I have several friends that have law firms and doctors' offices, and one friend who's a dentist. And I realized that, you know, there's like 20 people in their companies. They have no hope. So, so I actually deliberately built out a solution for those smaller companies.
So if I was one of your customers and I appeared on this breach list, what would you do for me?
Well, we would make sure that those, first of all, those logins and those passwords were, done with, because as far as those passwords go, you should consider them radioactive, never to touch again. And then a lot of times we'll put you on a education program. In fact, a lot of businesses these days require that. So we'll actually actively start phishing you to raise your level of paranoia. And then we'll just do a security audit in general and make sure that all the right things are in place. If you lose your passwords, but you are using multi-factor to at least access things like company VPN and company email, then at least we have a modicum of security.
This sounds more or less like what happens when you have a PCI breach. You have to have an audit.
Yeah. We used to. I've been involved with 2 FBI investigations and 1 SEC investigation, and sometimes they can get really ugly and really hairy. Yes.
Usually transmit data through the email spread. Why is that?
Email is not secure by nature, by default. Well, what's interesting is theoretically, when you're looking down into the rules governing SMTP, if both of the companies are using the correct SMTP controls, they actually will transfer things using a certificate, but there's no guarantee of that happening. It's almost no guarantee of that happening.
So it's data transfer.
I mean, yeah, and they clearly, I found his phone number. So clearly they weren't doing anything correctly. Okay, well, thanks for listening to me, everyone.
Thank you.